Hi guys, my name is Kirsty and welcome to Upside Down Books. It is very, very hot today. I think we are heading towards a weekend of like 40 degrees Celsius, so I'm going to melt. It's also been a couple of weeks since I last spoke to you. Apologies for the lack of videos. I've just been very busy doing work and Christmas and everything fun like that, and I think I semi-exhausted myself doing like 2 weeks straight of vlogging, because that's a lot of filming that one has to do. I've not done anything very exciting though, so I don't have anything to share and fill in with that, and I apologise that this wrap up for November is coming so incredibly late. But I did have a fun reading month in November. I didn't do a spectacular amount of reading, but I read some good books and I really enjoyed everything I read, so I'm gonna share those reads with you today and try and encourage you to pick them up yourself. In total, I ended up reading 6 books in November, and 2 of those were audiobooks, so I only read like 1 physical book a week. My reading pace is so slow right now to what it could be, and it's really frustrating, and it's even more frustrating this month in December. It's getting towards the end of December and I finished 2 books and that's it, so I really need to find some more time to do some reading apparently. Anyway, the first book that I read was The Boneless Mercies by April Genevieve Tuchulk. And this was sent to me by Simon & Schuster upon my request to read and review it, and it was very interesting. Finishing the book, I was under the impression that it was going to be part of a series, but this is actually a standalone novel, which leaves me a little bit sad because I would very much so like to know where it would go from the story from this point. It doesn't feel very complete in and of itself, but it was still an interesting read. I ended up rating it 3.5 stars. Part of me wanted to rate it lower, part of me wanted to rate it higher, but I think that's a nice in-between point. It's all about these girls that are part of a group called mercies. Mercies are basically hired killers that kill when someone's too old or someone's too sick or something like that, and to put them out of their misery sort of thing. And that's what they do, and they're sort of nomadic travellers, and they live by themselves in their own groups, and they're not particularly welcome but not particularly unwelcome in every place that they visit. In this story we have quite a mishmash of characters that kind of do and don't make sense being together. We're told from the beginning that it can only be women who are mercies, and straight up we have a male character who's travelling with them and who travels with them for the whole book, and that was very confusing and I didn't understand that. I thought he might have been there for a romance reason, but he sort of wasn't. It was like nothing kind of happened. The book is just such a confusing read. It's heavily based off Norse mythology, but it's not very original in its take on it. The way that the author has written this spin on Norse mythology is just by changing like one letter in words like Odin and making it Oben, or something really small like that, where it's like, well, why did you bother? That really frustrated me. It was probably my main complaint for the whole book, was the lack of originality when doing some sort of retelling. I don't think I would reread this, and I probably wouldn't gift it to someone. But if you came across it in your library and you're looking for something that's a little bit different, I do think it's still an enjoyable read. The adventures that the girls go on, because they don't want to be mercies anymore, they don't want to be killing people anymore, is very interesting, and they have like this big quest to go and finish, and they travel across a very wide and diverse land, and there's this whole plot going on with these witch wars, and there's lots of different paranormal and fantastical creatures in it, which is really cool. But yeah, I think I've pretty much just thoroughly talked you out of this book actually. It was not a very positive spin on it, but I did give it 3.5 out of 5. I don't know, I just wasn't blown away by this book, so we're just gonna leave it there. The next book, however, that I picked up was Mythos by Stephen Fry, and this made it onto my all-time favourites list for 2018. This was absolutely incredible, and I will be giving it to absolutely every person in the world that I can, because everybody should read this. I didn't really know what this book was going into it, but one of my friends recommended it to me and said that they were really enjoying it, so I thought, well, let's just get it with my next Audible credit, so I did. And I guess I sort of thought this would be a more or less bland reading telling me about greatness, but it's so not that. It's so funny. Stephen Fry uses voices and adds in stories and just makes up complete rubbish of how things might have gone down in between the myths, the stuff that we don't know, how Kronos might have been talking to Gaia and all sort of things like that, which was really, really funny. It's such an entertaining read, and just Stephen Fry's sort of beautiful verbal diarrhea onto the page is so enlightening to read and makes it such a fun way to learn about it. He's come out with a sequel to this called Heroes, which I guess follows on with other heroic stories rather than necessarily all of the gods, so I'm quite keen to go and pick up a copy of that. I think I can't decide whether I want to read that one on audiobook as well, or whether I want to get a physical copy, but I highly recommend this one. Obviously 5 out of 5 stars. absolutely 100% worth the hype. If you ever get a book that is narrated by Stephen Fry, then you are good to go. The next book that I read was The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J Maas. My cover is very... well, it used to have gold writing for the title. I don't even know if you can see that, and it's all rubbed off. Very battered copy, been read many times by many people. This year, since Kingdom of Ash came out, I decided I'm going to reread the whole series up to Kingdom of Ash because I have fallen out of love with this series. But since rereading this one, I'm falling back in love with it. The breaks have been too long, and they used to come out right over exam period and busy period when I was at uni, so it would take like a full month to get through things like Heir of Fire onwards, and it just sort of ruined the experience for me. So I'm just starting again. I refuse to dive into both Tower of Dawn and Kingdom of Ash without being 100% committed, because I know I like the series, I know it's a well-written series, so I need to give it the correct amount of time and dedication that it needs. So in November I read The Assassin's Blade. I was planning on picking up Throne of Glass in December, but I'm reading so slowly I don't even know if I'm going to get around to it. It is certainly right up there on my list of books to read next, and I'm just going to go through them. This was incredible to reread. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, which is the same rating that I gave it the first time I read it, and it was just so nice to dive back into the beginning of these characters and learn more about Selena and Sam, and that last final story was so hard to read for a second time, but I'm loving Selena's character so much more for having revisited her from the beginning, and I'm really looking forward to following her growth through the rest of the series from the start. I just need to find the fun again with this series, and it's definitely working so far, so that'll be an interesting one to keep track of. The next book I read was the second audiobook for the month, and that was The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy. I meant to read this earlier, but I kept forgetting to get a copy of it after it was released, and I really enjoyed it. I had some interesting discussions. I had some interesting discussions on Instagram with a few people about whether they preferred book 1 or book 2, and I'm sure lots of people have had this discussion. If you don't know, this is the second book in this series. So the first one is The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, which was super popular when it was released. Incredible. I think it's on my all-time, I'm pretty sure it is on my all-time favourite list. It was like the first book that I read this year, I think, and Monty and Percy are beautiful, great characters, strong LGBT plus themes going through it, a wild adventure that's just so unbelievable. And this one is sort of aspiring for the same thing, but I'm not sure it quite hits the mark because of the characters. As much as we love Felicity, who is his sister, it's just lacking, I guess, whatever Monty and Percy brought to it with 2 fantastic leading characters, and we go down to 1. There is still a lovely sweeping tale of completely random adventures that Felicity goes on. I loved the woman empowerment in this, and standing up and doing her own thing at a time where that was really not what women were doing. It was just great, and the book starts with someone accidentally cutting their finger off and her fixing it back up, so it's like baptism of fire from page 1. Highly recommend reading. Not saying it's a bad book, but I think if I had to be asked which one I prefer, I'd say book 1, because I just love Monty more. He's just such a beautiful idiot. But if someone would make a TV series of this, or if Mackenzie Lee would just continue writing books that are just more and more stories from these 2, I would be thrilled. So this was still a 5 out of 5 star read for me, hands down, but it didn't make my all-time favourite list for 2018. The next book that I read was The Lanterns Ember by Colleen Houck. Now this was the first book that I picked up for the 2 readathons I participated in. I did the one readathon and tome topple and didn't really succeed at either of them. I just had too much going on. I'm just not very good at readathons at the moment, and I was going to participate in a couple in December and decided that they're just not working and it's too stressful and it's not really getting the results that I want. I just need like a holiday where I read and do nothing else. But that's beside the point. The point is that I put this on my TBR and I was thrilled to get around to it because this came out in October for Halloween, and I just sort of missed the boat with it, had it on my shelf but didn't get around to it, and thought that I would end up with this on my shelf for years unread. Thankfully, I got around to it and really liked it. I rated this one a 4 out of 5 stars. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. In some ways it was better, in some ways it wasn't. This is a very beautifully cliched and sort of cheesy book without being so overly so that you wouldn't want to read it. Colleen Houck is a fantastic author. She's my favourite author, as I've said a million times, and she writes such fantastic little romances and characters, and she just gets them so well done on the page. This one is something you need to save up for next October, book it in and read it for Halloween, because it's a perfect Halloween read. All of the paranormal creatures in here have no spins on them. They are like their original, how they're supposed to be characters, with vampires and werewolves and witches and jack-o'-lanterns, which I guess are sort of an original character, which gives it a nice spin, and the boogeyman, and all of that is in here. They all have the different roles, and we have the real world and the other world, and our main character Jack, along with the other main character Ember, are posted in this little village. Ember has never been into the other world, and Jack is the guardian of the gate to stop otherworldians coming into the real world to protect humans. Whew, that was a long explanation. The whole plot centers around the fact that Ember really wants to see the other world. She has such a pull towards it, and when she meets this devilish vampire who agrees to take her there, they trick Jack into leaving the gate for a little bit, and they sneak through, and all sorts of madness happens. We get ships that fly through the air. I love pirate ships that fly through the air. It's one of my favourite things ever. And we have heaps of ambiguous characters who have so many unknown motivations, and we had a beautiful take on Frankenstein. So, pretty happy with this book. It was just a delight to read without needing to properly blow your socks off. Highly recommend. And then the last book that I read in November was The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Turbe. This was sent to me by Pam Macmillan for review, so thank you very much for that. I wasn't expecting to get this and was thrilled to be sent something that is so up my alley. I've been really having a hankering to read some more historical fiction, but I don't know, when you go into summertime and Christmas and all that, I know it's the other way around for the Northern Hemisphere, but I just don't really feel like picking up historical fiction. Beside the point, read this and loved it. One of the best things about this, apart from the absolutely stunning cover, is the fact that this is based on the true story of a Holocaust survivor who was put in the family camp, and I didn't know that there was a family camp at Auschwitz, so that was something new to learn. But there's a whole little backstory at the back explaining how Antonio got in contact with Dieter, who is the main character in this book, and what elements he's taken, what he's changed when it comes to names, and things like that. And it's just such an interesting account of her time in the camp, because it's all true, because he's got such a complete story, nothing's made up, you just know that everything that's happened here actually happened. So it's very raw and honest, and I think for about the first half of it, it reads like a nice story and you can almost forget that Dieter was a real person, and then there's an event that happens midway through and it just sort of changes the tone quite abruptly in the book, and you're suddenly like, oh my god, this has actually happened to real people, this is actual history. And it becomes so much more serious and just like powerfully written. It's an incredible read. So if you're looking for another World War II historical fiction Auschwitz story, I highly recommend picking this one up. This is not a new release, it's just a new cover release. So it has been out for a while and it's obviously been translated into English. Just, yeah, I can't recommend this one enough. This was obviously a 5 out of 5 star read for me, and it also made my all-time favourite list for 2018. So I read 6 books in November, and whilst I would love to have said that I read 20, I did not, and 6 has been pretty solidly my average for the last few months. So I'm hoping that I will start 2018 with a fresh leaf and we'll get some more reading done. But I also have particular goals that I'm aiming towards and changing up the way I'm going to read in 2018. So I will be having a video coming out shortly discussing my goals for the next year, so keep an eye out for that. But other than that, I'll see you in my next video. Goodbye.